Well, if we have to go through this, it's good to go through it together. And isn't it nice that we can be together in this way with words of Torah? So I'm Rabbi Ron Simons of the JCC of Greater Pittsburgh, the Center for Loving Kindness, and on behalf of the whole community, I want to thank all of you for saying that we'll spend an hour together on this most special day in study of Torah. Of course, we all know that today marks 4 years since the shooting on October 27th, 2018, at the Tree of Life Synagogue that took 11 loved ones, committed community members. As we remember them on this day, we know that we all help to ensure that their memories are forever a blessing by carrying forward acts of service, study of Torah, and commitment to our communities. So thank you for being with us to do that on this day. We're blessed to be joined by Rabbi Joel Goldstein, and in a moment, I'm going to invite Jason Kunzman, the Chief Program Officer of the JCC, to introduce Joel and to give a little more information about Joel. Just for general housekeeping rules, we ask that you keep yourself on mute unless engaging with the speaker. If you're calling in from a phone, which I don't think we have anyone here, but we want to know who you are, but I think we're all kosher in that way. In addition, if there are any members of the press joining us, we welcome you, but please know that this is off the record. And finally, please note that we are recording this session. It's for the sake of the 1027 Healing Partnership staff, so they can better understand what happened in each one of the learning sessions. It will not be shared with anyone else. One last piece of housekeeping is, Joel, when you do get started, let us know if you want us to talk to you or you want to hold questions until the very end. And with that, Jason Kunzman.
Thank you, Ron, and good afternoon, everyone. Rabbi Joel Goldstein is a faculty member for Yashrut, a laboratory of intensive synergistic learning of Talmud and Jewish law, founded and led by Rabbi Daniel Landis. Joel is an engineer turned rabbi who loves learning. He has taught high school Talmud, worked as a synagogue rabbi on the North Shore of Massachusetts, and as the campus rabbi at Syracuse Hillel. He is currently an educator with the Jewish Learning Collaborative and is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Rabbi Joel received ordination from Yashrut and from Hebrew College. When not studying or teaching Torah, Rabbi Joel enjoys spending time with his spouse and his children, hiking, obsessing about the LA Dodgers, and practicing Shotokan karate. On a personal note, a few of my colleagues and I have the absolute pleasure of studying every other week with Rabbi Joel, and I could not be more thankful and comforted to engage with him again in this session today. It is my sincere honor to throw it over to you, Joel.
Thank you, Jason. Can people hear me okay? Is that okay, good. I'm gonna spotlight. I don't want to view myself though. Everyone else can view me. But all right, I'll deal with it for the moment. But anyway, so I want to start out tonight. This is a tough topic to take on, I think, at least for me. And there's a tradition that when you enter a Beit Midrash, there's a prayer you say, and part of the prayer that you say is that I will not trip up in a matter of Jewish law, and therefore my fellows will laugh at me. That's what I hope. But here I actually hope something a little different, that I don't mess up in saying something that can be very hurtful, because this is a very touchy topic, and that people will be upset, either with me or just in general. So I really wish that hopefully we can do this topic justice, because it's I think a difficult topic. And the topic we're talking about today is something that gets to me every time people are senselessly killed. Maybe there's never a time when people aren't senselessly killed, but that about when people make them into martyrs. And is that appropriate? Are these people, should they be left as considered to be victims? Should we categorize them that way? Should we categorize them as martyrs? And where the good and the bad in that. So I want to look at it from a Jewish perspective, but I actually want to start because the whole question is, well, what is a martyr in the first place? And how do we define that? So I want to, I'll share my screen. I'm also going to dump the source sheet in the chat in case people are more comfortable with that. So you can click on the link in the chat, but also I'll share my screen. And I'm going to preface this by saying I actually don't think the term martyr is the most Jewish term. I think it actually has high resonance in Christian circles. And in fact, the first source we're going to look at is a source about Christian martyrdom. It's an article by a woman named Elizabeth Castelli, and she's actually dealing with this whole question and trying to kind of use early Christian martyrs as a way to think about martyrdom. And I'll read the beginning. I'm going to make this larger too so people can see it. And she's talking about people asking her essentially like, well, how do you define a martyr? And she says, my now routine response that the designation martyr is not an ontological category, right, but a post-event interpretive one, that martyrs are produced by the stories told about them, seems to fall short of satisfying the wish for a sacrosanct ideal devoid of ambivalence. But what interests me most about the longing for such an ideal and the desire for clear-eyed distinctions between true and false martyrs is that these wishes reflect a deep recognition of the religious, cultural, and political power of the figure of the martyr itself. If martyrs are objects of reverence, models for emulation, ideals against which to measure one's own commitments, they are also embodiments of compulsion and absolutism. Their incarnation of utter, unwavering conviction inspires desire for certainty, the certainty that they enact, but also certainty about their character and status. All right, so I want to just flag a few things here, and then maybe I'll open it up a little bit because we're a small group, and I think we should be able to talk to one another. But she notes that she really ideally, doesn't want to see it as, a category where if someone is a martyr or not, but rather how we interpret what happened after the fact, right? That after the fact, we turn people into martyrs. But nonetheless, that people, she seems to say, actually want martyrs, right? People very much desire it. And why? Because people revere them. They want to emulate them, right? They want to compare themselves to these people who were killed, all right? So with that, I want to just open it up of just responses to this definition. And, how does this relate to the way you think about victims in particular? So, and people can just either maybe raise your hand or shout it out. We're a small enough group here. Is it Dean? Is that?
Yeah, Dean. Yeah, thank you for this. One of the things that I began struggling with about the use of the term martyr immediately 4 years ago was that for me, this was personal. These are my friends, some of my best friends, my people that I would see on a regular basis, talk with, and have. Especially, it was I think either the ambassador or consul come from New York, the Israeli representative at a funeral, and use the term martyr was like a slap in the face. That he was not recognizing the humanity, the individuality of this person, and making it into something that served the rest of the world. And so that disjunct, or those two different sides were visceral. And I appreciate seeing this, and this is in this perspective.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that for a second, if that's okay. One of the things that her definition doesn't include is wanting to relate to that person, right? Martyr almost excludes the relationship with that person in that sense. And they become instead a holy figure, which is a word I want to come back to later. But yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Maybe we'll take one or two.
I'll just add on to what my neighbor and friend Dean said. Actually, right around now, I'm really disillusioned with people trying to win elected office, and with the ads that begin with images of Tree of Life. It just feels wrong. Like I know what the political point is, I know what the values point is, but it just doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And again, it's maybe, I'm going to be maybe a little repetitive, but it feels like the humanity's been taken away in some ways. If Ron, if I'm understanding you, Rabbi Ron, sorry, if I'm understanding you correctly. So,
I think Ron will do fine.
Great. That's so good. Anyone? Yes, Carol, please.
Well, I also struggle with the term victim. I don't like that one either. And my brother is one of the people that got lost that day, and I don't like to think of him as a victim. I also don't think of him as a martyr in view of this description that you have up there. He was just unfortunate to be in a place where he couldn't escape the harm that he was in. So I'm not sure how I want to categorize it, but I don't like either of those two terms.
Yeah, you're pushing back on categorization. It all might be problematic, right? Forget, we so grasp for terms, and it's like, stop, right? Don't do that. So yeah, thank you.
And Rabbi, I'd like to add one thing.
Please, I'm sure that's Brian over there.
I enjoy learning with you also bi-weekly. And actually, Carol pointed this out in the movie that premiered last night on HBO that I've had the opportunity to see several times, which is there were 3 congregations that were affected. So you have so much complexity because you have this, people were named martyrs before families had a chance to, they were labeled that way. The attack is labeled as a Tree of Life shooting, but there's 3 synagogues. So Carol, I think, refers to it as a synagogue shooting. So it has different names. So just the whole idea of labels actually creates additional pain points for families. Knowing that we knew in this community that people would begin to create their own definitions of this without permission, and that not every family grieves the same. So it's very, very complex. There are some families that do see the martyrology as very much tied into this, but other families that don't. So it's really interesting from a community perspective to try to maintain some sense of parness in a not very parv topic.
Yeah, no, I thank you. That's the best I can say for that. It was so important, and it's also, I think it hurts our world where one of the great things that postmodernity has given us is the idea that people can be defined based on your relationship to them, and not, and so they can have multiple definitions at any point in time.
I'm just going to jump in one more time if I could, and
yeah,
the conversation that Brian and I have had over and over again. Who gets to give permission for how a word is used? I mean, and who owns, right? And that's what I think is so complicated in all this.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you, Ron. It's Elizabeth, yeah, we'll take you as the last comment if that's okay. For now, there'll be more comments later, so don't worry. Elizabeth, you're on mute. Yeah.
Okay. I honestly had a question. Kind of. So like the labels, I feel like are for the external world, but it is for us to define how we grieve those lives that have been lost or that have been traumatized.
Yeah, thank you. And this is also maybe the awkwardness of me coming in as not someone from Pittsburgh and teaching about this in some ways. But so I appreciate just even being able to be part of this. But because I think you're right. All right, with that, I want to move on. I want to move on to some Jewish views on this. And the way I'll start this, actually, so the closest that I can come up with for martyr in Judaism, and it's often translated this way, is someone who dies what we say al kiddush Hashem, for the sake for this sanctity or creating sanctity for the name being God, right? Essentially, right? This is often used anywhere from people who are die because they refuse to violate certain aspects of Jewish law. It comes up a lot in the medieval period. During the Crusades, and of course, in every other tragedy that happens to the Jews, right? The Holocaust becomes a huge one as well. But I mean, even smaller scale than 6 million people dying, of course, it shows up. And so this, in its own right, I'm going to sound like I'm coming out of left field here, but I want to start with the topic of this is the whole question of what if you have like a complete Jewish apostate, someone who is, gone, whatever that means in the world. Maybe it's like the person who's converted to Catholicism, right? Whatever it is, the person who openly rejects Judaism. And there's a set of laws that we get that you don't mourn for that person. You're not allowed to say Kaddish for that person. Now that's a very complicated topic in itself. I want to bracket the complication there. I apologize, because I want to look at this law here. This is right, source 2 from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. This is a comment of the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, living in Poland in the 16th century. And he's giving the Ashkenazi, the European comments on the Shulchan Aruch on the Jewish law. And he says the following. It says, Yesh omrim de mumar shene'erag biad Ovdei Kochavim. There are people who said that an apostate who is killed at the hands of a non-Jew, Banav Omrim Alav Kaddish, that even though normally you wouldn't say Kaddish for this person, that person's children say Kaddish for them. Okay. All right. Now, you may not know where I'm going with this quite yet, right? But I mean, essentially what we're saying is, even though this person has declared themselves outside of Judaism, that because they were killed by a non-Jew, we're considering them Jewish again, and therefore we say Kaddish for them. All right. And so I want to take the next source here, which is kind of a summary source. This is a 20th century source, but it's summarizing a lot of other sources. And he brings what the source I just brought, which I'm not going to quote again, but he says the following in conclusion about it. He says, "From here is the basis for the idea that all of those who are killed at the hands of non-Jews are referred to as sanctified, Kedoshim." Right? He says, anyone who is killed at the hand of a non-Jew, any Jew is killed at the hand of a non-Jew, he doesn't specify why, which is kind of interesting, that person is sanctified. So I just want to take initially reactions to this, and maybe an explanation as well, if anybody has one at the moment. Why? Right? He's not talking anymore, and I just want to clarify, he's no longer talking about apostates, no longer talking about people who are out. It's just like any Jew killed at the hand of non-Jews is kadosh, is holy.
Rabbi, is there a different version of the word martyr than Kedoshim?
Not that I can think of. Yeah, it's a great question. Not that I can think of. Maybe I'll have to, I've been thinking about it for a while. It's the best I've got. Which already, Brian, I'm glad it already maybe is different than martyr, right?
When I think of Kedoshim and I think of the 11 that were lost, I think of them as being very holy people. And even if we don't use the term martyr, they were all very special people. So that actually, at least personally, speaks to me. But I don't think about, when I think Kedoshim, I don't think of that as martyr in the same way. But if it's the same word, then it gets into the complexity of English versus Hebrew.
Yeah, no, but it's not necessarily the same word. And I'm glad you brought that up, right? It might just be that we don't think about martyrs. We think about people who are sanctified or have sanctified in the world or created some sort of sanctification, and not necessarily as martyrs. And then we can go home, right? Maybe we can't, because I'm sure that, as was brought up so nicely, not every definition will work for everyone, right? People have different relationships with this, but it might be a different frame. Good. Anyone else?
A question. I'm wondering, is the distinction between, in the first definition, people acting out their Judaism in some way versus just a person who happens to be Jewish, but not.
Oh, sorry, Shani, keep going.
Shani.
Shani, sorry. Yes.
I'm just wanted to clarify the distinction between the two, that and in this definition, it's saying that if a person, whether or not they are engaging in some act of Judaism that's visible, is still considered Kedoshim.
Yeah, I think it's saying everybody, including, it doesn't matter if you were there's just a book that came out, Bad Jews, right? We shouldn't call people bad Jews, but it doesn't matter if you had completely rejected Judaism. It doesn't matter if, like, not only you completely rejected, you just weren't even acting as a Jew at all, or if you were a Jew who, pick whatever you think is your best form of Judaism. We can debate that at another time. All of those people, because they were killed, because they were at the hands of non-Jews, we haven't said why yet, they're all sanctified, all of them, according to this source. So yeah,
this brings up for me is the complexity of, if someone dies in a terrorist attack in Israel, and they're Israeli, they're Jewish, but they were just sitting in a cafe, right? And maybe they didn't have the sense of faith that comes along with the underpinnings of these texts, right? How is that dealt with in Israel? Are they martyrs?
Yeah. The next source is hopefully going to take us there, actually, as maybe a good bridge. And if I can speak personally for a minute, I had a housemate from college who was killed in a terrorist bombing at Hebrew U in 2002. I often think about that, of like, well, how does she think, when the moment before she died, was she thinking of herself as somebody who like was at risk and therefore, could be kadosh? I don't know. I don't know if that ever would have crossed her mind. And I don't have a good answer. She was part of the inspiration for writing this too. I'll admit that. Yeah, that was not a good answer on my part, but we'll hopefully we'll go somewhere for that. Jason, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that very point, Joel, that thus far the individuality, from the perspective of the individual who was lost, there doesn't appear to be any consideration of what they're not only at the time of the loss, but at any point during their life. How would they identify what's important to them? Just something that came to mind as we're going through these definitions.
Yeah, no, great. This is all, and this may even get back to our original definition from that article, is it's really about how people afterwards see them and not about how they want it to be seen. This entire kind of line of thinking. So, but, and also, and I want to bring this up because I think this is important, sometimes about, and maybe here about how the killer views them, right? The killer is viewing them as Jews and therefore they are kadosh, and that I think brings up all sorts of problems, as to like the murderer gets to define the person. But I think it also is very much a description of reality, maybe if it's not what we want, because it happens all right. We end up speaking more about the killer sometimes than we do about the people who actually died. Okay. If any other, did anyone have something that they're pressing to say or pressing to ask before we move to the next piece here? Okay, so this is it's a piece from the responsum literature. Rabbi Menashe Klein, who wrote an incredible amount of responsor, like people writing questions to a rabbi to ask anywhere from like, is this thing I'm about to eat kosher versus, just like how do you interpret this line, in the rabbis. He wrote an incredible amount in the 20th century. He's a Haredi rabbi. And in this, it's a piece that he's writing actually about the whole question about, someone who is an apostate Jew who has been killed. And he brings this little paragraph in here, which I think is very much relevant to what we're studying tonight. I keep calling tonight today, and maybe will help clarify a little bit, but also maybe cause more trouble. So I'll read. He says, in my humble opinion, it is obvious, and it's his language here I think is like really striking. It is obvious that anyone who's killed by the government or by a non-Jew because he is a Jew, this person was killed for the sanctification of the name of God. He says this is an overarching principle which truly includes everyone. When he says truly includes everyone, I think what he means is it doesn't matter what kind of Jew you were, like I was saying before. Okay? That since he was defined by the name Israel, and since he was killed since he is of Israelite seed, this person enters into the category of Israel. This is what Balaam, right? Balaam, the non-Jewish prophet, prayed, may my soul die the death of the righteous, and may my end be like theirs. So what I think he's saying is, if you were killed because you're Jewish, this is a Jewish death. And maybe even implied, and I'm going to leave this open, maybe even an ideal Jewish death. I think he's really hitting on martyrdom a little bit here in a shocking way. So I wanted maybe to open up, and if there's a prompting question, I'll say, how is this a Jewish death? Especially if you have Balaam asking for this kind of death in some ways, right?
I'll add just a little complexity to it. I don't remember how long ago Brian can tell us exactly. In Kansas City at the JCC, there was a shooting. And the person outside who was killed wasn't Jewish, but it was at the JCC. Is that Kiddush Hashem? Great.
Yeah. This has come up, by the way, a lot with, all politics aside, right? Non-Jews in the Israeli army, right? It's like if you die as a non-Jew, if you were killed in, let's say in combat for the moment, make it easier, killed in combat as a non-Jew in the Israeli army, right? Are you essentially not only Kiddush Hashem, some people said maybe you're even a Jew, right, at that point. Good. Anyone else? I'll give people another second to read through it because I think he's got a lot packed in there too. This is
I don't know if the way I would interpret this, and it doesn't mean I agree with it, but interpret it, is that in essence, the act of somebody doing something to you labels you whether you like that or not. That you are going to be labeled and somebody else gets a piece of that narrative.
great. Yeah, not great, but it's a very good interpretation. And I think, yes, very troubling. And I was bothered by that same thing again, is that the killer gets to almost define you because they killed you because you were Jewish, or maybe even to go to Ron's idea, they killed you because you were associated with Judaism, right? Therefore, you become this kind of ultimate Jewish death in some ways.
And Joel, it goes back to that that individuality. I feel like things are being dictated onto the individual who's been lost. So the way that they died is the righteous way. Who are we? Who is anybody to make that sort of determination on behalf of someone? It feels, it rubs me the wrong way. I can't quite articulate.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I may try to redeem him in a second, a little bit here, but I don't think he's that redeemable. So it's yeah. Is anybody open? Just make sure no one else has a comment. And of course, take your time if you're still thinking it through. I'll scroll through to see if anybody else is raising their hand or looks like they're really pressed to say something. I think maybe what he is also saying though is, the simplest part is, when you died, you were a Jew. You died because you were a Jew. You died as your identity, which is not your only identity, maybe, but in his world, I think it kind of is. And therefore, it's maybe the ultimate death, not in that it was, you died for a cause, you died because, you died trying to stand up for Judaism, but rather you died in the most, to use the Hebrew word tam, the most simple form of it was just simply your identity was acknowledged as a Jew. And that's really what at least we're projecting upon you that you want it to be in some ways, that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
So let's take another identity.
Yeah.
Let's assume that you're an American traveling abroad and you get killed.
Good.
I think so much of the way that the government and the news media is going to respond is based on the perceived motivation or the true motivation of the killer. Was it just random, or is it because you flashed an American passport?
Yeah. And I think this, Ron, that actually gives us kind of the difference in some ways between this text and the text before that we saw, right? That in that text number 3, he just said, it didn't matter what the killer's, motivation was. It just had to do with the killer was an outsider and you're an insider, kind of you're a Jew, the killer's not, or maybe the killer's the government, which is, I think, or probably what he's thinking of as the Nazis. And there it's really not about, it's about your identity. And in this one, it becomes about how the killer identifies you. And that's very problematic, I think, in that sense. Yeah. And works beyond just the Jewish definition. Dean, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, I want to ask a question. The thing that really bothers me in this responsa is the idea that someone was killed in order to sanctify the name of God. That a human's death is in order to glorify Hashem. Is that what is being said? And how do we parse that? I mean, how do we handle the deaths of our family members and friends here if we're taking that approach to it? That makes trauma for me even worse.
Yeah.
Around this.
Yeah, I think that's one way to read this text, and that's where it becomes into all the discussions we've had. This is very troubling. The other is, it was brought up before, of maybe this is a great outsider perspective, right? You see a wall of people who have been killed, for being Jewish, for instance, at some memorial. And how do you want to relate to it? You say, oh, this is a wall of holiness because these are people who were killed because they have my identity, kind of idea here, right? And I share that with them. But I don't know that, that this is, well, let me put it this way. If you asked Rav Menashe Klein, like, I don't know if any of his family members were ever killed in any, because they were Jews, but I assume so. He was a survivor of the Holocaust, right? If you asked him, the people you actually knew and loved, would you write this about them? I hope he would say no. That's really my hope. But I can't guarantee that. I didn't know him personally, so yeah. All right. We've got a few minutes here, so I'll just make sure nobody has any last comments in the moment, and if not, I want to kind of flip the topic on us a little bit, if that's okay. Not quite, but and I want to look at the first both murder and death in the Bible, which is Abel, Hevel, right? And I think, is it shocking? It was last week's Torah portion, right? So, but I just, I'll just remind people of the story here for a minute, and we won't read it inside, right? That you have Cain and Abel. They're both born. The first also two children that are born, that we're at least told about, that are born. And the two of them, Cain is a farmer, Abel is a shepherd. The two of them offer sacrifices of their produce to God. God pays attention to Abel's sacrifice, doesn't pay attention to Cain's. Cain gets upset. God warns Cain. And then the two of them, Cain and Abel, are out in the fields. Cain says something to his brother. We have no clue what, just says something, and then he kills him. Right. And then, of course, right, this is where it gets more famous in some ways, right? God says to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And Cain says, right, Hashomer achi anochi, my brother's keeper, right? And it's actually, if it's really both looking at the story, and I didn't include the whole thing, and also looking at the rabbinic literature on it, so much is written about Cain. Everything's about Cain. Cain's, repentance, how's Cain feeling, what happens to Cain afterwards, even the biblical story itself. Abel is almost nothing in the story. And to add to it, he himself, his name, Hevel, means like vanity, nothing, vapor, right? He's like forgotten. We never talk about him. It's kind of a shocking thing to me. And even, right, I just want to, add this one verse here. But first you have Adam has sex with Eve, right? And she conceives, she gives birth to Cain, and she gives this really nice Vatomer Kaniti Ish et Adonai, right? I created a person with God, right? It's this incredible name. And Hevel, what does it say, right? Vatosef, she gave birth again, right? Et Achiv, his brother, right? He's already associated with his brother. He doesn't have his own identity, right? Et Hevel, this person who's named essentially nothingness, right? And that's it, right? Why was he named that? We don't find out. We learn nothing about him, except that he is a murder victim, or victim, maybe even, as I was pointing out, he's murdered, right? That's all we really know about the man. And it's really a kind of a tragic story. And we also, I want to just kind of highlight, if you go through that same chapter in Genesis, and this will come up in a second, so it's going to sound like I'm coming from nowhere. You have this verse. If you go down the line, Adam and Eve have another son in place of Hevel, right? It's like he's easily replaceable to us. It's like, I don't know, my heart just like dies reading the story. I don't know how other people feel about it. But they have another a child called Seth, and we have this verse, and for Seth the son was also born. He called him Enosh, and then this is a very ambiguous piece. Then they began to call on the name of the Eternal, right? Who they is. Also, there's two different interpretations of this. Some people say it means they began to, and sometimes it says they like profaned calling on the name of the Eternal. But we're going to take this version here. They began calling God's name, right? This is kind of very mysterious piece. So with that, I want to read a source, and I'm going to give a little more background. So sorry, there's a lot of information to throw at you just to get to the source. But if you look in the end of the book of Numbers at the Torah portion that we often read on the holidays that gives all the sacrifices for the holidays, the only name of God listed in that entire portion is the name of the Eternal, of Hashem, of the Eternal, of the Yod, the He, the Vav, and the He. All right. And there's a teaching in the Talmud. Why is that? Because we don't want to give people, who are reading the Bible a chance to say, oh, they're not just sacrificing to one God, they're sacrificing to El and Elohim and Shaddai, and also to Hashem, to the Tetragrammaton name. Okay, that's all background for where we're going to go with this final source. So any clarifying questions before I go there? Just Okay, this is the Meshech Chochmah. It's Simcha Mer Simcha, I can never remember, of Devinsk. He's 19th century commentator on the Bible. Not an easy commentary usually, but here's what he's going to write. He says, and he's commenting on that verse, then they began to call the name of the Eternal. Here, in the portion about Cain, only the Tetragrammaton is written. He notices that the only name of God used in this portion is the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, right? That name, the 4-letter name of God. And it is like Ben Azai said at the end of the tractate Manachot, that the portions about the sacrifices are only stated with the explicated name of God, in order not to give an opening to sectarians to say that we sacrifice, heaven forbid, to some separate power or the like. Okay, that's all what I explained earlier. So, and now here he goes. And here, after Abel was killed because of the sacrifices, the people of that generation ceased offering sacrifices, and instead they all began to call in the name of the Eternal. Right? What is he saying? People saw that this dispute between Cain and Abel happened over sacrifices, and that something bad happened. And so they said, you know what? Sacrifices, they're not working. Something is broken in the system. Instead, we're going to pray. Essentially, we're going to verbally acknowledge God. Okay. Meaning to say that they used to publicly express the service of the Eternal, the Blessed, and his providence through sacrifices. Saying it used to be that, how do they do it? How do they have a relationship with God? They offered a goat, right? Or they offered, wheat. But they said there's something broken there, and they changed the way they were doing things, right? And then at the end, he gives examples of how actually Abraham and Isaac do both, right? When they offer sacrifices. But here's what I want to offer as a thought, and maybe get some responses to it. I think what he's saying is that because of the death of Cain, people took a moment to check how they were doing things, how they were behaving in the world, and said, we need to change it, right? We need to do things a little bit differently. We need to use Cain, not that Cain's a martyr so much, not that Abel, not that Abel is a martyr so much, but that Abel's death is something that can inspire us to be better in life, right? Whether, should never have happened, right? We're not going to claim that he had some mentality that he wanted to be killed, or some mentality that he wanted his death to be seen this way. But how can we step back? Can we respond to his death by improving in our own lives? And in that sense, I think maybe that's another way of looking at martyrdom, of not what did the person want? That's very important, and not how was the person seen at the time of their death, but how can I use their death as an inspiration in my life to be a better person, to do a little bit more. So I want to open, how do people respond to that thought? This is kind of my own thought about this, and I'm very open to critique about it as well. So it's.
I think in many ways, this has been the story of the last 4 years. I think this is what a lot of people have leaned into, is not labeling it, but trying to figure out how to move with and to learn lessons from, and what actions do we take to try to build a better world in our own way.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, to extend that a little bit, these activities that we've been organizing for the last 4 years are really, many of them around renewed energies toward tikkun olam and towards building stronger communities, not only to making safer spaces for worship, which is one of those things as well, but letting our grief and shock motivate us to dedicate more of our attention and time to the needs of the community and to each other.
Yeah, thank you, Dean.
And Dean, I would just add that certainly as the years go on, right, we try to personalize to the best of our ability those acts of loving kindness and tikkun olam in the ways that we perceive that those that we lost would have most likely connected with and appreciated. And I think, Joel, it sort of brings back, full circle, sort of some of the feelings that I've been having about that lack of individuality, that distance, that.
Yeah. Actually, Jason, I want to comment on that in a second. I do, I didn't think about this before, but, Abel, who clearly, if we understand, I think sitting behind this interpretation that Abel's sacrifices that he offered to God were done explicitly in the name of God with good motivation, as opposed to Cain's. It's like, this is a very personalized to Abel response that people are having. It's like, oh, Abel was really about, how do we properly call out God's name? So we're going to back off on the sacrifices, but do what the important part was to Abel, and like be inspired by his life, how his life personally was lived in how we're going to live afterwards. Maybe I'm reading too much into this text, but I'm hoping that's a good interpretation.
I think what I find interesting about it is that I agree with your interpretation of it, but then somehow society cycled back to sacrifices.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to keep on going around. We go round and round and round on these things.
But yeah, I will say
maybe we forget. And I think that, perhaps for some of us here that, ask yourself the question, well, on year 1 and year 2, how many people from out of Pittsburgh contacted you on this day, as opposed to years 3 and 4? Right.
Yeah. Wow. I never thought of it that way quite, Ron. And it's important. Yeah. Is that things like this don't stick, unfortunately. And people just go back to the way they were behaving before. That's how are we doing on time? I think we probably have time for like 1 or 2 more comments that people have.
We're at a quarter of, so
okay.
I feel pretty comfortable that if you were to stop at like 5 of, we'd be okay.
Oh, okay. This is where I was going to end. So I was told 40 minutes. So I was going to give people some extra time, but I also want to leave room for more comments and thoughts.
I'm confident that Jason can add more to it.
And Carol at the end will lead us in Kaddish Rabbanan.
Yes,
yeah.
we know.
Carol, please.
I feel like this year was really different for us than the other 3 years because of the film that premiered last night. And usually I'll get, people will reach out to me on this day or around there, but I had a lot more communications from people in my life just because they saw the movie last night. And so this year was really very different for me than the other 3.
Yeah. Is that
how do you feel about the movie? I haven't seen it, but how do you feel about having your brother's death out there on the big screen?
I've seen the movie a lot of times. I've seen actually both of the films. This one I've seen more. I just came back from New York where it premiered at HBO headquarters. My thought is that if the educational campaign that's going to arise as a result of this film, if something makes a difference, and we have to start with the young, because people aren't born hating, it's something they acquire along the way. If it makes a difference, then it'll be worth it. I like the movie. I have to get used to seeing myself in it, but that's the hard part for me.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Carol.
Rabbi, I do have a comment because
Please.
I think that what makes this obviously very intimate in our community, both those that were killed and those that were survivors, nobody was looking for this. And these are very humble, modest people. If I have to think about the holiness, not the martyrdom, but the holiness is who actually shows up in shul on time. That's where this all begins. Who are the ones that are first there? There's a holiness to that because they're the ones that are first to make the minyan. And it's the timing, we couldn't control, but the people that were there first were the people that were generally there first. And I think there's some holiness there. And I think that that's a piece of all of that, is that people have had to play public roles that they never anticipated ever having to play. And I think Carol represents a number of people that have had to both recover in a very public way and lend voice to things, which strengthens all of us that are just trying to help support that journey.
Yeah, I mean, also that's what made it, so hard looking at that very first Jewish text that we looked at about, the apostate, right? This is like, these people were the opposite of that, right? People who show up for Psuke de Zimra are, these are like, the pillars of our community that everyone is begging everyone to be all the time. I mean, all the more so they are, the kind of ideal of like, of Israel in some ways. Okay. I think maybe, unless we have any final comments or thoughts, we'll maybe move on to Kaddish D'Rabbanan.
Just
Yeah,
one.
please. Yeah.
I looked up the definition in my Milon. Alternate terms, and one in addition to kadosh is kadosh me'oneh. Someone who sanctifies the name of God through an act of, I guess, torture.
Is suffering, yeah.
Suffering of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
just.
I assume that's a very, sorry, Dean, that's a modern Hebrew dictionary?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Wait, this one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you do wonder, right? This has come up, this is what comes up from the very beginning, is, right, the Jewish approach is very different maybe than the Christian approach. And that sounds like a term that was intentionally kind of tried to map onto martyr, with martyr already existing there. So.
No, I just wanted to, because the question had come up earlier about how people refer in general discourse about this notion of martyr.
Yeah. So, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Carol, please.
I'll ask one more question. So are they victims? Are they martyrs? Or are they something else?
Yeah. I can't answer that person. I don't know if that was a question for me or not, but maybe for everybody, it's
for anybody.
Yeah. I'll just say from, not in the case of Tree of Life in particular, but in cases like people that I've, known, I like to see it kind of the way I was kind of claim at the end of like, it's somebody who was killed who I can get some inspiration in my own life in their memory, or I can do better in my life. And that's what I'm hoping for. So.
Well, thank you, Joel. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
That was inspirational and engaging, and really touched, who we are. And I'm grateful to everyone for their participation in all of this. I'm going to hand it back over to Jason for a moment. And as Jason concludes, I'll put up a Kaddish D'Rabbanan on the screen so that Carol can lead us.
Great. Thank you, Ron. And again, Rabbi Joel, thank you. Your presence, your teaching today really means quite a bit. So thank you. As our time of study comes to an end, we are going to take part in the time-honored tradition of reciting Kaddish D'Rabbanan. If you'll indulge me just for a moment, some backstory here. The Kaddish is an ancient prayer written in Aramaic, a sister language of Hebrew, which was the spoken language of the Jewish people during the period of the Second Temple and thereafter. The title stems from the second word of the recitation, Vayikadash, may God's great name be sanctified. Reciting the Kaddish is considered an act of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of God. The honor of reciting this Kaddish has been assigned to mourners. The Kaddish D'Rabbanan, recited after the study of rabbinic texts, is an expanded version of the full Kaddish. It contains a special prayer for the well-being of the rabbis, their disciples, and all who study Torah. Throughout the centuries, the teachers of Torah have played a central role in preserving and expanding the teachings of Judaism and in providing leadership and guidance for Jewish communities throughout the world. This prayer calls our attention to the importance and prays for God's blessings upon them and upon all who occupy themselves with Torah. Having concluded our study for now, we rise up the names and memories of Joyce Feinberg, Baltacha Bat Abba Menachem, Richard Gottfried, Yosef Ben Chaim, Rose Mallinger, Razel Bat Avraham, Jerry Rabinowitz, Yehuda Ben Yecheshkel Selma, Cecil Rosenthal, Cecil Chaim Ben Eliezer, David Rosenthal, David Ben Eliezer, Bernice Simon, Bela Rachel Bat Moshe, Sylvan Simon, Zalman Shachna Ben Menachem Mendel, Daniel Stein, Daniel Avraham Ben Baruch, Melvin Wax, Moshe Gadol Ben Yosef, and Irving Younger, Yitzhak Chaim Ben Menachem. Zichronam Livracha. May their memories forever be a blessing. Please join Carol, if you wish, in praising God as the source of life and learning even in the shadow of death. You are welcome to recite the entire Kaddish or just responses as you wish, but please do so on mute, and please rise if you are able.
Yiskadao, Vyiskadash Shemei Rabbah. Vioma Divra Hirute Viamlech Malchute. V'chayehon uvyamechon uvchaye dechol Beit Yisrael. V'agalo uvizman kari v'yimru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach Li'olam Omei Omaya. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal Shemei Dekudasha Barichu. La'ela minchol berchota v'shirata. Tush b'chota v'nechemota v'damiron b'yama v'yimru. Amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon. V'al kol Tamidei Tamidehon. V'al kol mond oskin b'yaraita. Divi hadra hadain v'di b'chol atar v'yatar. Yehei l'chon l'chon shloma rabba. Hina v'histachol v'rachamin. V'hayi nerichin. V'zono v'richo. U'perkonami kadam avuam divi shemaya v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shloma rabba min shemaya. V'haim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mrama. Hu barachamav yasei shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen.
Well, it's good that we did it together. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. May everyone's memory be for a blessing.